City-based campaigns fascinate me. I find they are some of the hardest games to run well, and they demand a lot of moving parts to feel real. Before your players set foot in a city, there is a lot of preparation to be done, which is why I'm always interested in checking out urban-themed RPG books. If you're curious about running city adventures, whether sandbox-style neighbourhood crawls or intrigue-heavy capers, Cityworks may be for you. Before we get started, I'd like to mention that you can join my Patreon to get exclusive adventures, supplementary rules, and access to my Discord channel and games. You can also support the channel by picking up one of my books over at DriveThru RPG. Now, Cityworks was published in 2003 by Fantasy Flight Games. It was written by Mike Mearls as part of the Legends and Lairs series. It is structured into 5 chapters which explore characters, city design, construction, urban adventures, and a bunch of useful tables. I have both the physical and PDF versions of the book. The physical book is hardback with black and white interior. The paper quality isn't great, but it's serviceable. The PDF text is properly OCR'd, but there are no bookmarks, which is an annoying oversight. This is an instructional book, primarily designed to help the DM create and run a city for D&D. It includes some random tables, advice on narrative structure, and city map building procedures. It provides a guide to build a city starting from the city's origin and history and building up from there. The book begins with character rules and advice for players. The differences between urban campaigns and wilderness or dungeon campaigns are explained, and advice on how each of the different classes fits into the urban environment is given. This is useful advice for player and DM alike, as there are very distinct differences in the city. Not everybody encountered is a villain, and not every bad guy can be killed without consequence. There are consequences for murder hobo behaviour that may not occur in dungeons or deep in the wilderness, and players will have to adapt to fit into the city if they are used to solving their problems with a sword. Social skills and role-playing are much more important, and stealth and investigation occurs frequently. Because of this, rogues are important. City combat can be complicated. Enemies can escape easier, there is the possibility of civilian casualties, and a street brawl can be interrupted by the city guard. Despite dangers and complications, cities are in some way safer. It is easier to replenish resources and rest, and there are lots of NPCs to get help from. As well as advice for surviving in a city, there are some 3rd edition specific rules for players here. These include new classes, such as the Acrobat, the Assassin, and the Pit Fighter. These are familiar and rather uninspiring, but well suited to the city. There are also prestige classes, the Kingpin, the Speaker of the City, and the Street Stalker. They are a little bit forgettable, though. These are more DM-facing than player-facing. There are also some feats, which are also a little unremarkable. There is a selection of utilitarian new spells, like Erad's Silent Killer, which is flavourful and designed for surreptitious use. You create a small but powerful vortex within a creature, twisting its innards for 1d6 points of damage per caster level, with a fortitude save halving this damage. A favoured spell of wizards who operate in cities. This spell leaves no obvious evidence of its origin and operates in complete silence, though an observer may note your casting action. I can imagine a murder mystery involving a wizard who kills his victims with this spell. There is an emphasis on spells and spell feats which make the effects or the casting of spells subtle, an important quality in an urban spellcaster. There is also a set of spells called Urbanmancy, which requires a feat or a class track, and didn't seem that interesting to me. But I'm looking to mine content for running an urban game in an OSR system, rather than new classes and feats, so I'm happy to bypass this section, even though some of the stuff could be converted to BX or AD&D. Overall, this section provides some useful advice for urban adventuring. Watch out for thieves, find lodging to avoid sleeping rough, and use enchantments carefully. The next chapter is about city basics. This section focuses on developing a city's origin and history and has information about law enforcement, economy, government, and the effects of religion, as well as common city archetypes. The information on the origin of cities is interesting but not particularly inspiring or useful. Deciding a town is built around an important trade route or useful resource is good to know for the DM, but not useful for the game. The idea of designing a city by describing its history and origin may seem logical, and is often advice given for designing adventures as well, but I think it results in unnecessary work and coming up with things which seem important but which will never be discovered in play. I think a better approach is to create conflict and interest first, then briefly fit history around those conflicts. This is even acknowledged in the book. You can easily become bogged down in tiny details that do nothing to further your campaign's readiness for play. Overall, this section is a bit dry, not very inspiring. The government section provides enough information on the different alignments and governing systems, but is too broad and doesn't inspire much for in-game. In addition, a lot of this information is already included in the Dungeon Master's Guide. We also get some fairly useful information on factions and how to fit them into your city, but again, it is quite broad information. The section on law enforcement is useful though, providing stats and info on different levels of guardsmen, how likely guards are to take bribes, how vigilant different types of guards are, and how easy they are to avoid. There is some simple rules for crime and punishment as well. Finally, there is a fairly large section on religion, which is also mildly useful. It suggests establishing ratings for each religion's secrecy, the size of the religious buildings, and the various activities each religion devotes its resources to. It is notable that everything in this section is applicable to human medieval cities, but there are precious few fantasy elements. Chapter 3 deals with city construction, and this section is one of the most useful and describes how to build a city. Like many city building guides, districts or precincts are used to create distinct regions within the city. Most of the districts are based on either social class or a specific industry. The construction guide is practical, using blocks of 500 foot square to distribute throughout your city, each containing about 50 houses. The size of each district depends on the city archetype, and there are procedures for where to place these distinct blocks. There is advice on placing streets and how the density of buildings differs depending on the district type. There is an example map, but it would benefit from more varied map examples for the various city archetypes and examples of cities integrating with terrain. There is a brief section on unique city traits, such as cliffside or subterranean, and how those would affect city design. These are a good quick way to add distinction to your city. Overall, this chapter is pretty good. It gives a nice procedure for creating a city, which is easy to follow and gives good results. Chapter 4 opens with a passage which reinforces the point I have made from Chapter 2. As DM, the responsibility for bringing a city to life and constructing exciting adventures within it falls to you. You can spend days and weeks labouring over a city's map, charting out its competing factions and writing its epic history, but, in the end, all that means little if the players are bored during the game session. This chapter covers the ins and outs of designing urban adventures and includes advice on how to transform the city you created into a vibrant, living game setting. All the maps and factions mean nothing if the players are bored. This section begins by explaining how to set the scene, describing the architecture, landmarks, and even the attitudes and clothing of the city folk, and to describe the tone of the city as the players explore. I much prefer the show-don't-tell method, which is only hinted at here. I find that players tend to get a strong feeling about a place by how it directly affects them, not by what they are told about it. For example, if the city is poor and people are starving, players will remember having to pay 10 times for the food and having an NPC die of starvation, rather than hearing lots of descriptions of hungry peasants. Players will remember the half-ruined city more if a slab of falling masonry almost crushes them, rather than being told of the dilapidated buildings, in the same way that they will recognise the city as crime-ridden after being mugged for the 4th time, rather than hearing tales of the raving gangs and criminals. Following this is a refresher to designing adventures. City adventures are more tricky to build than a standard dungeon crawl. It is more difficult to limit PC movement, harder to anticipate their actions, and the PCs have a much easier time of replenishing their resources. The city adventure tends towards investigation and role-playing, which can introduce more complexity than a dungeon adventure. While I appreciate this advice, it is followed by the common advice to begin adventure design with a plot hook. I believe this approach is flawed. The plot hook, often synonymous with the inciting incident, is typically the first thing players encounter, and thus it's tempting to treat it as the first thing a writer should create. But this reverses the logic of good design. The hook is a consequence of the adventure's deeper structure, not its foundation. Starting with a hook risks designing backwards. You build a flashy opening without knowing what it's opening into. Instead, I think that adventure design should begin with the core objectives, the dramatic question, or the antagonist's scheme. These elements define the shape and stakes of the adventure. Once those are in place, the hook can be crafted to draw players into that structure, and it should be easier to create multiple possible hooks for the same adventure. There is some fairly straightforward information on creating a villain, his plans, motivations, and actions, but a lot of this is covered in DM guides, so not much new information here. Some of the advice here is very useful though. For example, suggestions on creating timelines and using flowcharts, social encounters and stealth, as well as advice on how to deal with divination magic and the Speak with Dead spell. The next section of the chapter explores the urban environment, presenting rules for chases, crowds, fires, rooftops, tavern brawls, sewers and stunts. I like the gamified chase rules, which allow for plenty of player decisions. Though they are designed for 3rd edition, some of these rules can be simplified for OSR games. There are details on the major urban events that could occur: fire, flood, plague, riots and siege. Each has a description of how this affects the city, reaction of law enforcement, economic impact, aftermath, and how to run the events and include the PCs. This section is quite useful and specific enough to inspire use. The rules for fire certainly will come into play based on the actions of most parties. The final section gives advice on running a whole campaign in a city, reminding us that there will be a focus on role-playing, politics and stealth, rather than travel, combat and action. Character actions can be more restricted with a variety of consequences, which can be helpful to rein in high-level characters. While there is some additional good advice on how to include factions, this section is quite short and shallow, which perhaps is a good description of the book in general. The final chapter contains quick reference tables with distinct encounters, NPC names, traits, secrets and jobs, shops and street names, and random building interiors. These tables are all quite generic and very useful in a pinch, but you might be looking for something with a bit more flavour. The random encounter tables can certainly be replaced with the EMDT nocturnal tables or swords and wizardry city encounters. From an OSR perspective, the city creation procedures are the most portable. You can lift them almost as is for BX or AD&D and get a functional, legible city map plus a sense of scale and composition. A lot of the rest, classes, feats, spells, stat blocks, are all 3rd edition centric and would need to be adapted. I can see some inspirational material you can strip for parts, including a few spells, but very little you can drop in wholesale. Philosophically, some of the adventure crafting advice feels generic and not tightly aligned with the OSR focus on building sites and situations over plots and hooks. I'd call the OSR compatibility mixed. Useful scaffolding for emergent play on a city building side, less so on the adventure structure side. I haven't yet ported the spells or chase rules, but they're on my shortlist to test in an OSR context. The book is structured well, with clear chapter purposes and straightforward writing. It's all black and white art, fine, occasionally good, but rarely evocative. The overall package feels a bit short. There's room it could have filled with deeper explanations or more examples, and it's certainly missing some fantasy elements. I'm not enamoured with Cityworks, but I do use it. If you're a DM who wants a structured introduction to designing cities, especially getting the size and district distribution right, it's genuinely useful. If you're hunting for something more fantastical and designed for OSR, you'll find this a bit dull and more work to adapt. However, this can be picked up fairly cheaply from DriveThruRPG and may be of use the next time you wish to design a city. I've included an affiliate link below. I'd love to hear from you. What are the best city books you've used? And what are the biggest obstacles you've faced when designing or running urban adventures or campaigns? If you'd like to support the channel, check out some of my books on DriveThruRPG or join the Ranger Lemure Patreon for exclusive adventures, house rules, and access to my Discord. And as always, thanks for watching.